And if we don't have the habits, or I like to think of it as the yogic philosophy of sadhana, then we're not actually making those changes. So that's one of the most important pillars that we're actually integrating.
Hey, Soul Family. Welcome to the Alive and Awake podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kay, and I have spent the last 20 years teaching people how to work with their wounds and overcome their greatest fears so they can learn how to thrive in a world where they were only taught to conform. Each week, we will dive deep into the practical, the spiritual, and the mystical so I can teach you how to do the inner work to know yourself, trust yourself, and eventually love yourself enough to create a world where you feel fully alive, awake, and free. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode. Ready? Let's dive in. All right, welcome to another episode of the Alive and Awake podcast. I am here with my dear friend and soul brother, Sam Kabert, who has worn many hats and has been a huge fan of mine for the work that I do with internal family systems. He really has the biggest heart for helping people know how to do their inner work, know who they are, and how to thrive in a world where they were only taught to grind. Has a huge resume. He's done almost 6 podcasts. He was in the $1 Million Club at 30, 40 under 40 for Silicon Valley. Just really like the epitome of working the American dream, only to find out that his soul was not fulfilled. And what I loved about his journey is that he actually wrote a book called Soul Life Balance. And if you haven't heard of it or dove into it yet, I would highly recommend that. Because what we don't really know as a society is that oftentimes we are going through something called a spiritual awakening, where we often feel like something is wrong with us, or that we're broken, or that we don't fit in, or we're not enough. And so when we start to have these feelings, naturally we seek outside of ourselves to kind of figure out what's wrong. But Sam talks about his journey with overcoming all of that adversity and really finding his true self underneath all of the layers that he was wearing to fit in with society. So without further ado, I would love to get into it with Sam. And hopefully have you guys follow him. He writes amazing blogs. He has a book coming out, Overcoming Overwhelm. And I just encourage you to find him and to really soak up all his medicine, because he is a wealth of wisdom. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Alicia. I really appreciate the warm introduction. It's always good to connect with you. And yes, I am a huge fan of yours, and not just the IFS and parts work, but how you're showing up in the world as well. And so stoked to be on your podcast and riff with you a bit here.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. Um, so what is it about this book, Overcome Overwhelm? I know that you have a really like soft spot in your heart for helping people really find themselves on this journey that we call life. So what's the book inspired by, and how did you like get that ping to bring it into existence?
Yeah, thank you for asking. My first book, my fourth book, but the one you mentioned, Soul Life Balance, that one was like a labor of love for 3 years in the process. And really, my first night with plant medicine ayahuasca back in the day in early 2019, had this idea of soul life balance rather than work life balance, and what you alluded to, how I was disconnected from my soul. And it really took me a while to dive into the depths of my own psyche and do my own healing in order to be able to write that book. Being a writer and someone who had just written my first 3 books in less than a year in 2018, 19-ish. And yeah, it was nuts. But in 2020, like a lot of people were writing their books that they've always wanted to write. So for me, I had to really learn to sit in the feminine, or that archetypal energy of yin, just being like, this book isn't ready yet. And when it was ready to come out, it just came out. And now it was published 2 years ago, February 22nd, 2022. And I just got the Audible out now, which is exciting. And around that time, I got into keynote speaking, specifically speaking to corporate audiences, a lot of that. And A lot of the book, Soul Life Balance, is very deep. I mean, the subtitle is a guide to igniting and integrating spiritual awakenings. So it wasn't really like I could use the content of the book and speak to corporate audiences. So I needed to kind of come up with something else that really would be, in a way, we could use the phrase Trojan horse with corporate. And, even the word soul, a lot of times I'll say, think of soul as your inner world. I'll explain what that means and, your thoughts and feelings, things like that. And I had known that there was another book coming since 2 years ago in 2022 when I got into speaking, something that I could lend to corporate audiences more. And now that I've really been embodying the best I can of the merging and blending of yin and yang, or yang and feminine and masculine, I haven't wanted to force the next book. And last year, which I'm happy to dive into this stuff as well. But last year was the most challenging year of my life by far, no kidding. And I just kept applying what I've been doing the past few years to surrender deeper and sit with those parts of myself coming and just everything else. And through it, I really was sitting in my relationship to worthiness and how I don't feel worthy. And this book title, Mastering Worthiness, came through, and it was a book, a program, all this stuff that I'm going to do at some point one day. Again, I tried writing it, I tried developing all the stuff, and then I was like, no, I'm very much still in it and
Mm.
don't feel worthy. So I'd be a fraud to do something of that caliber, right? So that's kind of like on the back burner. So that's kind of how I work with these projects, where it's like I have an idea. And I mean, at least now, before the spiritual awakening, it was like shiny object syndrome as a serial entrepreneur. Like, let me do this, let me do that, and all these different things. Now I'm doing better. It's still a challenge to kind of sit with things and overcoming the overwhelm, or overcome the overwhelm. Still working on the title. This one just came through. Actually, it's a good thing to chat about, in writing my first fiction book.
Mm.
And this fiction book was, I don't know the first thing about like fiction. And I started watching a master class on how to write fiction, all of that. And I had some ideas about writing my next book outside of Mastering Worthiness, not Overcome the Overwhelm. I know it might be a little confusing, but I had some ideas come through last summer when it was reflected back to me by a friend. Shout out to Barry Robinson. She's like, I think your next book should be about what you went through and how you handled it. And I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. And that just planted the seed. And then this movie, Secret Window. Have you seen the movie Secret Window?
No. Is it
It's
a children's movie?
Oh,
Or
not at all.
no? Okay. All right. Because
Uh,
you mentioned like fiction. You're doing like, I'm like, all right, well,
yeah.
what's in there?
So Secret Window is
Secret window. I'm gonna write that
it might be
down.
like 1997 or something. It's with Johnny Depp, and it's a
Okay.
psychological thriller. But essentially, the movie is about this writer who is writing a life event to, no spoiler, but to help him process some things that went on in his life. And I didn't even put it together till much later, but that's kind of where the inspiration of this fiction book came from, to write loosely based off of my life experience in 2023 being so challenging, and creating like these fictional characters that are loosely based off of me and some other people in my life that played a role in it. So in writing that book for just like 2 weeks and watching a master class and really honing in on my skills as a creative writer and just like impressing myself, all of a sudden I don't even remember how it came through, but it was this idea of overcoming overwhelm. And
Mm.
it was maybe the overwhelm I was feeling in writing that book. It was kind of the inspiration to write a more business catered book 2 years ago. And then also the blending of this idea of the book, Mastering Worthiness. So it has like a little bit of all of this in there. And right now, what I'm rolling with, I'm about 60% done with the book, 2, 3 weeks in. I mean, with the first draft at least.
Yeah.
What I'm rolling with is this 6 step breath process
Mm.
for inner peace. And it's specifically the 6 step process for busy professionals to
Got it.
access inner peace. And as you might guess, it has a lot to do with breath work. But yeah, that's kind of a high level what's been going on and how it came about.
Oh, I just love seeing all of like the different genres of your like evolution tying together in this one piece. And there's definitely a lot to unpack there. One thing that I think would be really helpful for the listeners is obviously you present as masculine, right? Like for the first half of your life, you were really caught into playing like that masculine role, right?
Mhm.
Chasing the money, working really hard. You mentioned in your book Soul Life Balance about how you were out of balance, right? And then you mentioned in here, like you're really tying in that feminine archetypical energy, which a lot of men in our culture are like, what? Like you want me to
Yeah.
think I'm feminine? Like, no, I reject that. So how do you, well, not how, but what is the difference for you internally now that you have embodied some more of your feminine yin side into the way that you work and how you create?
Oh, what was the
Yeah.
question?
So what's the difference between the way you felt back then when you were really channeling and like grinding through with your masculine side
Mhm.
and like working to now you're actually more intuitive, you're creating more space, you're listening to your intuition, you have inspiration flowing through you. Like how do you balance the two inside?
Yeah, great question. So, just to simplify it, for me at least, it's the doing and the being, right?
Mm,
It's so easy for me to be like, for a book, since that's what we're talking about now, be like, I have the inspiration for this book. I like to write, I know how to write. And from a practical point of view, I know how to assemble a team of freelancers, virtual assistants to support me in the areas that I am weak in so that I can make this book come to life, and I can do that really easily. But then the
mm,
feminine side is like, oh, this is almost parts work, right? Like, wait a second. Is this really ready? Is it like, do you really want to do this? Or even right now, like, I'm holding myself accountable to write 1,000 words every day. And I just was telling you before we hit record, um, I think for 2 or 3 days now, I haven't wrote, and at the time of this recording, I don't know what day it is. I think it's 23rd of January or something. And I would say this started maybe around the 4th or so of January when I started writing 1,000 words a day. And that's kind of the blending of the masculine and the feminine as well, because I might say like, hey, I'm going to hold myself accountable. I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to show up for myself and do it. But then also the feminine kind of coming in and be like, yeah, but at what cost? Are
mm.
you going to do this just because you said you're going to do it and integrity is your highest value, and then you're going to burn yourself out and then push yourself backwards? Does that actually make sense? So it's kind of this dance of awareness when it all comes down to it. And for me, like, where I am tapping into the masculine even more than the 1,000 words is my ocean plunges and my cold plunges. I live at Santa Cruz in California, right near the ocean. And if today's the 23rd, I think it is. I started doing this every day, the January 5th, and I had my first trip. I travel a lot, and I went to Vegas. And the morning of that flight, I left early. So at 6 a.m. when it was dark out, I did my breath work and meditation, my ocean plunge before I left.
Mm.
Lucky enough, the hotel had a cold plunge and sauna right by my room. So I was able to keep it going for the 2 days I was there, and then came back at like 8 p.m. and got back in the ocean, and that's the thing that is really helping me with my mental health so much. So it's like, yeah, the writing also helps me with my mental health because it's cathartic, but it is this blending. So yeah, it's kind
I
of where
love
I'm at.
that. I love it. I work with so many what we would call like masculine dominant men who feel like if they tap into their feminine side, they're actually going to lose that. Right. But
Mm,
then uncovering the fact that you have such a hyper masculine side because you've been denied that feminine, you've been denied the permission to go with the flow or bring in like how does your body feel? Like we've been so conditioned out of that we just don't pay attention. And just to see you essentially like working your dharma or like building your dream, really honing in on both energies within you, I think is really inspiring. And in my opinion, the way that we are going with this new earth energy and how we want to move as a collective, right? It's like really the embodiment of both. So yes, having the discipline to write those 1,000 words a day, but then essentially don't shame yourself if that 1,000 words isn't written, because you're still doing other things as discipline that are important to you, but really allowing that flow to come through of like, maybe today's not the day for the 1,000 because it's not inspired, it feels forced, and I'm just going to honor that.
And there's another thing I want to bring in too, because I forgot to respond to what you said about like a lot of men feeling like, oh, why would I want to be feminine? Like that's not manly or whatever, right? I used to be the biggest Joe Rogan listener. I mean, I wouldn't say the biggest in terms of like the biggest on the planet, but that was the biggest the most podcasts I would consume would be Joe Rogan back in like 2015 through 18-ish. And listening to Joe Rogan talk about yoga gave me that metaphorical permission slip to try yoga again, because I really liked yoga in college, and I would go after a snowboarding trip when my muscles, my body would be sore, and I was a meathead in college, all the bros and top frat, all the things, they would make fun of me like outside the room, like for being in yoga. So and I stopped going. I was like, oh, I can't do that, and then hearing Joe Rogan, who I say is like today's modern John Wayne, talk about yoga, it's like, oh, I guess I can do that, So it really started like then. And then when I did ayahuasca, I remember just getting more and more into yoga. And one day I saw an offering for I think it was a new moon ceremony, not a full moon ceremony. And at the time, I was like, I have no idea what this is, but I read the description and I just had this voice coming in telling me to go. And all of the like stereotypical macho stuff and everything, it was coming out like, no, 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 right? And then I went and I was still in the vibration of the medicine very much, like a week or two out of it. And the whole time, the message coming through, I was still like interacting with Mother Ayahuasca, even a week or two later. And she was telling me that it was time to move on from fantasy football. And
Mm.
fantasy football at the time was my life. Like literally all the content I would consume, my homies from college, like our chat would go off 365 days a year. We would put alarm clocks on for 3 a.m. for the waivers to like get an edge on each other, like literally everything. It was wild. And I was just like, I don't know how I can do this. And go figure, when I eventually took action and integrated on that, all the guys disowned me. They called me all the names and whatever. And even till this day, here it is, like 5 years later, like a couple of them I talked to, and I think most of them by now, like they kind of get why and whatnot, but like they're not the people that I'm hanging out with and talking to anymore. And I see them maybe once every 2 years or something. So it was really, really uncomfortable to lean into these edges for all of these reasons. And I would just like to encourage any men listening that resonate with that to seek out a men's group. I now facilitate local men's groups and things like that. It's so powerful to connect with other men that are walking this path as well. So yeah, I just want to mention that.
Oh my gosh, it's so brave, honestly. And I think that is truly, to listen to the answer of that call is so hard. And it is, and the reason why people stay stuck, right? Or they stay like they're not growing, they're not evolving, they're not feeling more fulfilled with what they're doing with their time, because they get so attached to the groups that they're in or the behaviors that they're doing, and they get almost like sucked into the matrix. And then to think about shifting or changing or leaving that is almost like existential, right? It's like you can't even, it's like you can't even process what it would feel like to not be a part of what you've been doing all this time with like your friends, your family, all of that. uh and as you listen to that call, it is what the spiritual community would call like almost like a dark night of the soul, or like an ego death, where you really feel like alone with yourself, but you have this inner knowing that you're supposed to do it. And when you actually are brave enough to do it, this is the outcome, right? Like we are here to grow, we're here to evolve, we're here to create change. Like we're not supposed to just be stagnant, like, living every single day the same.
Right.
um, And it is scary. I know I've certainly had my own journey with those types of changes. And I remember telling like a friend group one time, like, if I quit drinking alcohol, I'm afraid that you won't be my friends anymore.
Mm,
Right. Like we really, really feel like if we stop doing what the people around us want us to be doing, then we're going to be like excommunicated, which is scary as hell. So kudos to you for like saying yes and like braving through that, because most people don't actually listen. It's like a fleeting thought, right? But when you work with the medicine as you did, it seems to me like I haven't done that, but I obviously know people who have. It's almost like an undeniable call.
yeah, the integration, right? Otherwise, it's just experiences and whatever, and we're not actually going to have any change. And a quote that was like at the forefront of my mind, and thank you, at the time was hang out with people with a common future, not a common past.
Mm.
And I heard that from James Whitaker, hang out with people with a common future, not a common past. And it's not saying like, oh, I don't care about my past, like friends, relationships, all that. It's to your point being like, this is where I'm going moving forward. So, yeah.
It's huge. I mean, it really is, I think, something that people are starting to kind of to wake up to now. Because in my practice, I see so many people who have really outgrown their environment that they're in, but they're just so afraid to change. They don't
Mhm.
trust that the universe has their back or that their inner spirit's guiding them, to make moves. So great. I think it's just more men, more women need to understand that when you choose to answer that call, that really deep knowing in your heart, even if it's not through an ayahuasca ceremony, that is what your like essentially like your north node is. It's to take that next step, and the path will be revealed as you choose to walk it. Right. It's not
Mhm.
going to be revealed to you as you choose to stay in the same stagnant energy and same environment where you're not growing. Essentially, like you'll start to implode, and you'll
Mhm.
lose yourself and you'll lose yourself and you'll lose yourself because you're just not choosing to listen. Um,
Totally. And both of us being breathwork practitioners as well, like to your point, like medicine's not always the answer. It's not for everyone. I mean, I wrote a quick book last year, a workbook called Psychedelic Compass, that's in a lot of ways to deter people from doing medicine because it's
mm.
all like journaling prompts and what you should know, because it's very much taking the red pill. Having said that, like we're both somatic breathwork practitioners, and a breathwork journey can definitely be the thing that gets you there, you know?
It is. Uh yes, it is the the one modality that dislodged so much from my nervous system that I didn't know was there unconsciously. And it is, again, you're brave enough to go there. You have the courage to do it. And the more you do it, the more you just really start to understand, that your body holds on to so much more than we can even fathom. And you wrote about this in your book, right? So, how do you, you know, obviously people that work in corporate, they're not necessarily the type of people that are going to want to sit down in their workday. So I'm really curious to hear the tools and tips that you have to help people really manage their stress and overcome overwhelm. My guess
Mhm.
is so that they can feel more balanced and more connected to themselves internally throughout their day, like reducing stress, reducing, like the rumination, reducing anxiety. Like breathwork has so many benefits if we just choose to tap into that. So how did you yeah, what is your thought process of what are you adding into this book?
Yeah, stoked to share this in the 6 step breath process. So, first off, like, yes, I'm writing this book in mind for like the busy professional who a lot like it's kind of like uh, a general term, right? But thinking of people that would be like, yeah, maybe I'm religious, maybe not. Maybe I'm spiritual, but I'm probably not spiritual, you know? So
Yeah.
it's really hard for me to not go deep. And then there's also this fine line of being like, okay, I want to write for a specific demographic, but I also want to stay true to what I believe and
Mhm.
who I am and not distill that. So from the very beginning, it's deep, and basically introduced the term shadow work by Carl Jung, which I think is going to be very out there for a lot of people. But if you're someone who is picking up this book, you do want to overcome that overwhelm. And I'm meeting them where they're at with certain terminology and business stuff because I have that background, right? So it's easy for me to relate. And kind of like walking, I love writing so much and looking at a book and looking at like a journey, almost like we would do a breathwork journey or even a podcast and see, when I went through my yoga teacher training, I remember them talking about how a yoga class is a journey and using the music to kind of bring them along that journey. So now having like all this background in facilitating medicine, breathwork journeys, and yoga, and all these different things, like I'm bringing that in where I don't feel like I really wrote that way in the past. So I'm like holding their hand in a certain kind of way to prepare them.
Mm,
And when I get into the 6 step breath process, breath is an acronym, stands for, the B is breathe to heal. So the
mm,
first thing is all about like introduction to breath work. We already talked about shadow work. Like this whole thing is a healing journey. And before we get there, we're talking about the different types of overwhelm, namely how overwhelm is kind of like a signal for a deeper lying situation underneath, whether it's a emotion of anxiety, stress, or whatever else. We just use a term like overwhelm, and underneath that, traumas, all of that. And then the two different types of overwhelm being internal and external. Like for me, I have massive existential angst, and it's not like suicidal ideation, but it is like this underlying, very deep, overwhelming existential angst. And that is more what my last book, Soul Life Balance, was about, right? This book is more talking about the external overwhelm that the common busy professional is feeling. Yet, I would argue that I think for a lot of us, when you go deeper, it is a form of existential angst. It will manifest and look different for each person. So the first one again is breathe to heal, because this is a healing journey. The second one is relax to feel. And this is all about dropping into the parasympathetic nervous system. This is all about the 90-second rule, which is a science thing that tells us that our body has a 90-second physiological response when we experience an emotion, energy, and motion. We know all this, right? So it gets stuck in the body. So relax and fully accept and feel. And this is, I feel a little bit cast on an island sometimes when I talk about the feeling stuff, because so many people, I just did another yoga teacher training recently, and I actually left the training and didn't complete it for a variety of reasons that we won't get into. But one of the teachings, just this isn't a reason why I left, but one of the teachings they had just totally didn't resonate, and was like, never entertain a bad feeling, always feel good and positive. And I'm coming off of a disastrous, toxic relationship as well, with a partner masked with false positivity, right? So of course some triggers coming through there for me, but I truly believe that like we really need to feel these parts of ourselves. Otherwise, if we just stack positive affirmations on top of them, we're not actually going to get to that deeper layer, and we're creating more of a mess, for lack of a better word, that we're going to have to unpack later. So the second pillar, again, relax to feel. Then we get into energy to reveal. And
mm,
I'm getting into energetic hygiene, which this is a little esoteric and woo for the demographic as well. But it's all about our energy, other people's energy, the energy around us, the content, all this sort of stuff. And let what you were just feeling reveal to you what's there, right? And then this is the part where people really will get stuck. So when the A comes to surface, the A in breathe or breath is accept to surrender. We need to
mm,
accept what was just revealed to us so that we can surrender deeper. And then we're getting into the T, which I haven't decided if it's going to be transmute or I forgot the other T word, because transmute I like, but it might be a little too deep. Transmute to transform. So after we surrender, that's when we're going to transmute that energy to transform into this version of ourself that is no longer feeling overwhelmed, stuck, all of this type of stuff. And the very last one is one of my favorites. It's habits to integrate. Because again,
Mm.
I've been acting as an integration guide for the past couple of years, helping people integrate their spiritual awakenings into everyday life. And if we don't have the habits, or I like to think of it as the yogic philosophy of sadhana, then we're not actually making those changes. So that's one of the most important pillars that we're actually integrating. And then also just knowing that we're not going towards an end destination of ongoing inner peace. It's like this process is for any time we come and we feel overwhelmed, we come back to these steps and then we can get back into really the practice and philosophy of soul life balance, this way of living where we put ourselves and our inner world first and foremost.
I love that. And it's so true that the overwhelm really is just a symptom of something that is unprocessed, undigested, unfelt in the body. And the body's always sending you those cues. And so when you do drop in with the breath and you're curious and you're willing to explore in a very specific method, that people can use, because then they can take it with them, right? Wherever they are. And that's almost like the checkered flag, like, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Let me go and do my check-in. Let me go literally use my breath. And I've gotten in the habit since I became a somatic breathwork practitioner of doing that at home. And my son is super adorable. He's 10 now. But he knows, like, if mom's having a moment, she's gonna go breathe. Like,
Yeah,
I've been doing these really big deep belly breaths or whatever. The one time he was so cute, he came in, he actually had a brush and just started combing my hair as I was like breathing.
that is
Um,
cute.
but it's like, when the point is that when you get in the habit of knowing what your body feels like when it's not in alignment, like, then that becomes like the dissonance, right? I don't like to feel stressed out anymore. I don't like to feel overwhelmed anymore. And now that I have this tool with my breath, I actually know how to get back into homeostasis and balance within my body so that I can handle the rest of my day or whatever's coming at me. And when people don't have these methods and they don't know that they can literally like tune in and use their breath, as you're saying, then they constantly like compound and compound and compound, and usually use a different form of escapism, like whether that's like numbing out, avoiding whatever it is, substance, or anger,
Mine's
whatever
food.
comes out, food, all of the things, right? Because it's like we have not been taught how to self-soothe in a way that actually works to change our equilibrium inside.
Yeah, and what I just mentioned, the food, this has been a big journey for me the past 8 months or so, just really shining a light on my binge eating and emotional eating. And I'd say in writing this book the past few weeks or so, I've really noticed that when I'm doing my breath work, right, and whatever time of day it is, and I like to stack it with the cold plunge, I feel the best in my body.
Mm.
And I'm not eating. I'm not emotionally eating. Now, having just gotten back from Vegas, which I didn't think it was going to affect me as much as it did, 3 days, 2 nights. Some other things I did after that too, like I had some commitments and some other travel plans, and I overextended myself, and all of that led to skipping out on the breath work for several days. And now, just starting to come out of that, I notice how like being in Vegas, eating like good food, because I am a foodie. I used to have a food show on YouTube as well. And when I am overeating, when I'm emotionally eating, when I'm binge eating, all of these things, that also leads to not doing the breath work, because now all of a sudden I have all these rolls in my body and I don't feel lean, and come up with all these excuses why I can't breathe. Whereas when I feel lean and I feel good in my body, that's when I am more inclined to do breath work more often throughout the day. And then also, I'm not as hungry. And the big key for me, which is still such a challenge, but it's like when I want to go grab that food, it's like, okay, can I just sit down and breathe for a minute or two first? And usually, if I can, I'm like, okay, I'm not actually hungry. I was trying to just mask it, So that's been a big, big thing for me.
It's huge. It's huge. I remember when I was a new mom and I could not get my child to sleep. And it was so stressful because you're just exhausted. And I used to go in the freezer, like I'd put him back in bed, I'd go to the freezer, I'd grab a piece of chocolate, put him back in bed, go to the freezer, grab a piece of chocolate. And my therapist at the time was like, wait a minute, wait. Before you grab the chocolate, you have to identify the feeling that you're having in your body,
Mm.
right? Because we're so unconsciously wired to do that thing that we think is going to make ourselves feel better that we're not even paying attention to what's underneath it. It's like, yeah, I'm freaking stressed and I want the damn chocolate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But obviously, that's not conducive with the lifestyle I want to live and the body I want to have and how I want to feel. So when you actually sit down, and I do this with my clients often as well, it's like, what is the feeling? Right? If you could just slow down and like become aware, then you actually stay in your prefrontal cortex, which is where you can actually make rational decisions. You might actually choose something different. It's like, okay, well, maybe I don't want the chocolate. I actually probably just want tea, or I want to cry, or I want to like sit with my blanket or whatever, but something that isn't going to like sabotage the progress, which we're not trained to think about.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so easy to fall back into those old habits when we have, like you said, a change in schedule, or we're off of our routine, or, all the things that we know we need to do that, life just gets in the way of. But the most important thing is that you noticed it, you're aware of it, you recognized it, you brought it back in, and it's just giving yourself that grace because you have all the tools, and it's about being imperfectly human, right?
Yeah, I love it.
That's so good. So you touched on in your book, or like the inspiration for this book, which I also have really strong in my heart, is this concept of unworthiness,
Mm.
right? Like for so long, it's like this word worthiness, this word worthiness. It's like we're always in seeking, like we're always searching, we're always searching, we're always like really that's the core wound, right? We come into this world and we inherently feel unworthy because our parents were wounded and society is wounded. And like we have all of this trauma and everyone feels so broken that we just hold on to that in our core. And so I know that you said that you went through some major changes in 2023, and that was the feeling that was coming up. So how do you see that tying into the book and what you're feeling called to create?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So last year, some of the things that really propelled me to go deeper, helped me in these were really what I kind of talked about earlier, the feeling of it and accepting it. And that's kind of where the emotional eating, I started to look at that because I've known that I emotionally eat and I've like been like, yeah, I should work on it, you know? Um, but that was a big thing for me.
Mm.
Another thing was just getting into the subconscious mind and more into how to, as Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe would say, break the habit of becoming yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or break the habit. Yeah. And I've read that book, Break the Habit of Being Yourself, I mean to say. And I took meticulous notes. I mean, I'm still going through it. And that's just such a fantastic book, along with some other resources. There's a guy, his name is Brandon Epstein. I think I've had, no, he spoke to my group. I don't think I've had him on my podcast, but he recently put out a book called Program to Fail. And
Mm-hmm.
his formula is really amazing as well. And I've just looked at all these different, people that I resonate with and I'm learning from and kind of applying that to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much still a process. There's somewhere on my Google Drive a bunch of Adyashanti clips that I have. I don't remember if it was a book or YouTube or a podcast, but I have like Adyashanti, Bashar, and some other people. When I hear anything about like worthiness, just like screen record it, and I have a folder on my Google Drive so I can go back to that because Audia was talking about some similar things that you were talking about, how we come into this world uh, in, inherently feeling unworthy, right? And like I said, for me, it's still very much in the thick of it in my journey relationship to worthiness. I feel like it's almost a few steps forward, a step or two back, right? And that's just part of the process. And that is part of the process. And with this book, I don't know because, like I said, it's a little over halfway complete for the initial draft. I don't know that I'm going to get deep into worthiness. Of course, like touch on it but I think it's more about these tools that we're talking about, like the breath and feeling and the subconscious mind stuff as well, to get started,
Yeah.
which actually, like in a lot of ways, it's funny to see the breadcrumb trail, and it's even funnier to see it when you're in it and see where
Mm.
you're going. Because most of the time, for me at least, I see it afterwards and I piece it together. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But there has been a couple times recently where I've been like, oh my God, like this book is perfectly setting up the next one. I have
Mm.
never really seen something, and I'm not intentionally doing that, right? It's just bringing the subconscious to light, being like, oh, maybe that's why this is going on. And then also releasing expectations, just being like, that's interesting. Now I move on. But that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I love that. So it's the really the practical tools, but then maybe a sequel around kind of figuring out like the deeper root cause of the overwhelm or the internal crisis that a lot of us don't always want to face.
Hmm.
Those deeper core wounds, which is sort of like my zone of genius when someone's in my office. Um, but yeah, I mean, we're all walking around in shadow, right? It's just like we feel really disconnected from ourselves and um, and we don't necessarily need to get into, what I personally feel was an agenda that we've all kind of been caught up in.
Agreed.
But I think it is, learning how to get back in touch with that intuitive intelligence that's always guiding us, that is planting those breadcrumbs for us to come home, to listen to ourselves, to tune in, to do those journal prompting questions that sometimes we want to avoid because we don't want to face it, or we don't want to be confronted with the truth, or we don't want to be confronted with those uncomfortable feelings. So we just continue to, you know, run on a program, as Dr. Joe says,
Mhm.
until we're really ready to dive deep and change that. And I truly believe that we are ready for change. We are coming through a massive shift in energy on our earth plane, and people don't want to overwork. They don't want to self-soothe with food. They don't want to feel crappy about themselves. They don't want to sell their soul for a paycheck. So I feel like this book is really coming out at the right time and a pivotal time in our history for people to know that there are other answers out there besides constantly, you know, um, you know, working the 9 to 5, lather, rinse, repeat, and feeling like there's not any options or any answers.
Yeah, it's depressing when I really feel into it,
Mm.
and a lot of that y- plays into my own existential angst, and then it's easy to get into that victimhood mentality and have that part emerge and just be like, there's no hope, and
Mhm.
that's where a lot of stuff for me, I've had to really rise above that because I've just had a long core wound history of just despair, melancholy, quit, and just like it's not here. I really align with Dolores Cannon's work, and that's really inspirational for me personally.
Yeah, I recently read something on one of her oracle decks, and I had to read it a couple times because she said that every soul doesn't incarnate into the earth plane unless they are evolved into the seventh dimension of reality.
Hmm.
And I'm looking around being like, whoa, you mean every single person here on the planet is at least evolved spiritually into the seventh plane? Like that was like, I'm like, oh, because our human self wants to, believe in the separation, that we're not all in this together and that we're not playing roles for each other. And that, we're here essentially like on accident. And we're finding more and more and more that that's just not true. Like science has now shown and proven that, but we're being denied a lot of that information. Um, but it actually brings me, and this ties in perfectly to the concept of mirroring, right? You recently sent
Mhm.
me a blog that you wrote, which I was like, hell yes, brilliant, right? Like how our external world is really mirroring for us to do that inner work and like look at those core wounds. Um, so last thing, tell us about your article. How did you come about this? It was beautifully written. If you haven't checked it out, please go to samkabert.com blog and look up external mirrors, and you will find all about exactly what he's talking about and how our people in our world really kind of are pointing to us to do that deeper inner work.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. I was so stoked to share that blog with you because I was sitting on the beach in Malibu one day, just watching the surfers and seagulls and feeling the wind and just like really at one, with it all. And some wild stuff was going on. And side note, I've said for a while now to replace like crazy with wild when we have these synchronicities and be like, whoa, that's crazy, and I've been like, well, it's it's wild, it's not going
I like
crazy.
that.
And our mutual homie, Chris Hager, recently around that time, this was probably summer, fall or so, or early fall, he invited me to use the phrase, of course. And I was like, I love that because wild still has a little bit of a connotation of disbelief, whereas,
Sure.
of course, is like embracing it. And it's like, of course. So, like, when these synchronicities happen, going from crazy to wild to of course, or just going straight to of course, has been such a massive game changer for me.
Wow.
And yeah, isn't that awesome?
I love that because it's almost like you're owning the fact that you're the creator, right? It's like,
Yeah,
of course, this is happening to me right now. Why wouldn't it be? I'm like, oh, yeah, but I've always felt like I wasn't worthy of that. So why, like,
exactly.
oh, it's
Yeah.
so cool.
And
I love
uh,
that.
Chris would be awesome on your podcast. His story and what he's been sharing recently has been amazing. And he introduced a lot of us to this guy. His name's Peter Evans. And if
Mm,
you Google search him, you'll find like one thing. Have
okay.
you heard about him?
No.
Yeah, you'll find like one thing if you Google him, and he was in the Olympics in Australia or something as a swimmer years and years ago. Other than that, he doesn't really exist. And we like to affectionately refer to him as the wizard, and he's an energy worker. And
Okay.
around this time, I don't remember if I just saw Peter or not, but it was around that time. And one of the things that Peter actually was saying to me in our dialogue was like, I'm still in disbelief, right? Like he fully knows. I have these moments of extreme clarity of understanding, like in trusting and faith in the universe and all this, but I'm still in disbelief. And that whole conversation stacked with the energy work and then the integration of Chris just happen, or of course, right?
Uh-huh.
Telling me this idea of course, alongside me going pretty deep on Neville Goddard's work, and Neville Goddard's spiritual teacher from like 1940s or so.
Yeah, I
I was
recently just started diving into him. His 10-book compilation I ordered from Amazon, The Law of Assumption.
Okay, I'll check that one out.
Uh,
I don't have my
yeah.
pen here, but I'll write that down and check it out. The two books that I was oscillating between were Feeling is the Secret and
Mm,
Relax More and Try Less on Audible, both of them like an hour or two long. And
love
I
it.
would just like listen on repeat, right? So that with of course with like the energy work and all of these things, like I was very much for a few weeks there vibrating so high, like very much
Mm,
awake in the dream, and just massive synchronicities after one after another. And in the beginning of that whole stretch was when I was at the beach, and it was a download, you could call it channel, whatever we want to call it. And it just came through that this idea of like, because I had a lot interpersonal things with almost all of my relationships at the time, like friendships. And the idea of internal family systems being played out through our relationships as mirrors, and literally like the physical manifestation of our internal parts shown to us in the relationships from other people, and this idea of like external family systems. So obviously we talk about mirrors and things like that, and like what for me that another big thing last year that I was getting into was looking at the different people that I'd come into contact with and be like, okay, what's the message for me here? Like,
mm,
there's a message for me here, whatever they're saying. And the more I would get curious about that, the more these synchronicities would come up. And then I started to play with it and get really curious. And I was like, there's something going on with this person that I'm talking with about her ex-partner, and that's bringing up stuff for me that I haven't healed from ex-partner several exes ago. And let me just play with this to see if I put more intentionality to heal that, if that's going to make a difference for her. Lo and behold, it changed and it shifted what was going on with her. And I started to do it with more people. And that's when this whole idea of like EFS, external family systems, being like the physical manifestation came through. And I was like, it kind of blew my mind. So yeah,
Wow.
that's like kind of just rambling on it.
I love it. And it brings me back to, I would say, and I even get caught up in it a little bit, but not as much because it doesn't resonate in my body anymore. But almost as if someone starts talking about an ex or talking about a situation, you automatically almost relate to it and you want to tune into it or have the conversation, almost as if it's like gossiping back and forth, right? About like this energy that obviously it doesn't really feel that great because it's not seeking to solve the problem, it's seeking just to rant. And
Mhm.
if you can actually do what you're saying around, like, why is this being presented to me and what is the deeper work? But what I think I heard you say is like, if you do your own healing work on it, the other person benefits.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I'm still caught in the disbelief of that. There's still like this human side of me that's like gaslighting myself, right? And that's like my work of course of being like, no, of course that's how it works, and to quit gaslighting ourselves, and that goes into the worthiness part, right?
It's so true because we have really, really been conditioned out of knowing our true capabilities and our true power when we tune into that energy because we are the energetic, right? So anything that you shift or change within you automatically has a ripple effect to whoever you're connected to, right? I saw this the biggest with my own mother wound, right? My mom doesn't go to therapy. My mom doesn't want to feel her feelings. My mom doesn't want to acknowledge things. And obviously, there's a lot of turmoil there. But the more I started to heal and clear and shift and change my perspective and like really do that inner work to raise my vibration when I was around her and just stay in my truth and stay in my center, it automatically shifted hers. Like she's sending me stuff about spirituality now. Like it's incredible to like to see the shift in other people when you really do choose to do that work within you. Like as you know,
Yeah.
as you clear, it's like they say as above, so below, but it's like, no, no, no. What about like as within, so without around you?
Mhm.
Right. Like it affects everybody because it's the energy that shifts and changes.
Let the
It's
energy
so
reveal.
powerful. I love it.
Yeah,
So
very cool.
cool. I
Thank
never
you.
thought of it in regards to um like shifting the conversation or shifting it in that way.
Yeah, well,
Super
take it and run
powerful.
with it.
Oh, I'm gonna. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
because
yeah.
there's just certain conversations now. It's just like, I don't really resonate with that anymore. But like still want to hang out with them. I still like the person. I still like, um, but really the more that you start to come into yourself, know who you are, know what you're capable of, really tuning into um, that power within, then like you said, the synchronicities are just like, oh, yeah, of course.
Mhm.
And then we forget, and then we remember, and then we forget, and then we remember.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. It's trippy because it'll be like I'll have these like kind of moments of being like, man, I was like so much in it, like not in it like in the shadow work, but just awake in the dream. I mean, in this type of way, and being like, when did that shift? And wow, that feels like another timeline. That doesn't even feel like me. And it can be so hard to get back in it. And right now, to your point of like, forget, remember, like, I feel like I'm on the verge of remembering again because I'm
Yeah.
in like a period of forgetting. And the more I go try to like remember, like the more resistance because it's that energy thing, right? That energy thing. So it is fascinating. I know though, this conversation, I can feel it. It's starting to, because it's so lively for both of us, and the synchronicities with Neville Goddard, both of us getting into it, and I'll listen to the book you recommend. I know all this is just going to kickstart because those are the things that really help me, in this regard. And like you said too, like we have different passions and interests and all things. We didn't even talk about my Bali trip. I was in Bali for that's a whole nother podcast, but I was in Bali for a specific reason. And that was some straight up shadow work. And
Oh,
that totally changed so much. And I'm still integrating that whole adventure and trip. So
wow.
I know that plays a part of it too. But
That's so
yeah.
good. And you're always on the path, right? Like you're always seeking and like integrating the lessons. And I love that. I think it's a gift to have someone that is also like not only consciously aware, but also wants to serve and teach people how to become that, to believe
Mhm.
in themselves, to know that it's within themselves, and that it's not this outside external thing that we're seeking.
Yeah, and I think this is the part of it that's fun. A lot of people think of like doing the work as shadow work because I personally believe like being on this quote unquote path is shadow work in itself. But that doesn't mean that it's all like dark gloom and hard and sticky. Like, sure, there's a lot of that that's very challenging, and also, it's fun when you're playing with it. It's not fun when you're in the throes of it and you're in the thick of it. But like to your point of like always doing the work and getting curious and looking at the mirrors and being like, where's the lesson for me? Like you're playing with the energy of the universe and you're seeing it reflected back to you. It's like, whoa, this is cool, as opposed to where I was before being like, oh, I just want to transcend this human experience and be an alien because I don't resonate with this type of life. I don't want to do this. Now it's like, okay, how can I play with that sort of energy as a human?
Oh,
Right.
I love that shift for you. That's huge. Hell
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
Oh my gosh, Sam, it's
Yeah,
so
it's
good.
fun.
Well, this has been a blast. I love diving deep with you on all the topics all the time. It's great to catch up and hear what you're working on and what you're creating. Where can we find you, and what do you have cooking up? I know you said that you're interested in doing more speaking. Obviously we can find you on your website. Like what? Yeah. What's going?
Yeah.
Oh, and
Thanks.
your podcast, of course.
Yeah, my podcast I took a break on last year. I think I hit 202 episodes being out since 2019, and then it's been on pause. But I'm bringing it back soon, and would love to have you back on the show for I don't know, maybe a third time or something like that. It feels like. And yeah, the podcast is called Soul Seeker. There's over 200 episodes, not new ones coming out at the moment, probably soon. And my YouTube channel is Spirituality Simplified, and that has breathwork exercises, meditations, visualizations, and just educational content to help simplify this massive and complex topic of spirituality. And then my website, Sam Kabert, and at Sam Kabert on Instagram. I'm most active on Instagram. And Soul Life Balance, the book is now available on Audible. So that's super exciting. Took me 2 years to record it myself. But it's out there, which is cool. And Overcome the Overwhelm should be out probably around March or so of 2024.
Oh my gosh, I love this. And I'm going to put it in the show notes, but if you have not seen Sam's expert excerpt on breaking down the movie Soul and how this Disney movie with him having his own spiritual awakening, Sam does an amazing job at commentary to really talk about how his path was really a big, huge initiation for him to reconnect to his soul. So all the things, I will put that all in the description, and make sure that you follow him and that you support him on his journey, and really surround yourself with those people who want to see the best in you and want you to evolve into your soul filled self. So thank you so much, Sam. It's been an honor, and I just love you so much.
Love you too, Alicia. The honor's all mine. Thank you very much. And the soul video is awesome. I want to do a Barbie one too, by the way. I don't know if I told you that. But
Oh,
anyways, thank you so
so
much.
good. You're welcome. Talk soon. Thank you for staying to the end of the episode, everybody. I hope that you found a ton of value listening to mine and Sam's chat. We were all over the board, but hopefully you found some really helpful information to dive into so that you can start to do that deeper work to really get to know yourself and know that this world and this life really is for you. So the more you get curious about what's coming up in you and what you don't want to do anymore and who you don't want to be anymore, the more depth you'll get into your psyche and into your body so that all of these other concepts can come alive in you. And make sure that you head to Amazon to check out Sam's book, Overcome the Overwhelm, with his 6-step breath process. It is now available. I have given it to half my clients. It is sitting in my waiting room for people to grab because I feel like it is incredibly powerful for us to get out of this grind mindset where we really can start to reset our nervous systems throughout our day so that we can feel present and calm and we can feel grounded and we can feel full of the life that we're here to live. So, thank you again, everybody. If you need help with this, you know where to find me. Make sure you check out Sam's website at samkabert.com and go and look at his blog and all of the free resources that he has there for healing yourself, for building your business, and creating the life that you deserve. Love you so much. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode, and we'll see you at the next one.